Thanks, Nick. Right, good afternoon. So I'm a co-founder of MyLife Digital, and I am not a GDPR expert. Okay, and I am not. If someone had told me 5 years ago I'd be talking to a bunch of people about data protection, I'd have laughed at them. And I'm certainly not a lawyer, but I have over the last few years become very aware of the GDPR and the text, and I have been a data practitioner for a number of years. Some of you actually know me as Jay Cromack, who's also CEO of Wood for Trees, a charity analytics business. And MyLife Digital actually owns Wood for Trees and also a sports performance analysis business. So we set up MyLife Digital in the back end of 2014, so pre-GDPR text coming out, although we were obviously aware of it happening. GDPR really is only the Data Protection Act on steroids. We set up MyLife Digital really as a bit of a disruptor, really. We wanted to rebalance the trust in personal data between the individual citizen and the organization, because we saw a big change coming. So we obviously knew about GDPR, but we never, I would say, set out to be a RegTech GDPR solution. We do, though, have a very simple mission, and that is to enable the digital economy and to pretty much see the benefits that digital society can bring. So kind of what is digital understanding? For me, it's very different to being able to just go on Facebook and know how to use it. Digital understanding is actually about being able to go onto Facebook, use it, but actually also understand how Facebook are harvesting your data, how they're monetizing it, and how they're selling it to other organizations, and how people are accessing it. And I think, and sorry if I'm going to use my notes, but I have a number of key points, and I do have a tendency to kind of like go off track. So I'm trying to keep myself on track today. So for me, digital skills are important. It equips people to adapt to, question, and shape the changes of technology and the internet that it's bringing to the world. And we are all seeing, the uptake of devices, Internet of Things. So I was at an event earlier on today where it's EDF and Jaguar Land Rover all talking about how they're capturing all this data and they're allowing us to open the car door, open the front door, set our heating. We're seeing medical devices being attached now and more of it in the future. And there's a big question mark really over the security of this data, the integrity of the data, who actually owns the data. So as digital understanding kind of comes about, people are going to kind of start asking more questions over literally who owns the data. Here we go. Right. So we do see a kind of a tsunami happening. And people used to use a tsunami as a kind of there's loads of data being created. But I'm looking at it now as a tsunami of change in terms of behavior. Has anyone ever seen this or read this document? This was released in 2014 at the World Economic Forum, and it is a bit of a Bible for us at MyLife Digital. It talked about the change and how people are kind of wanting more control of their data. It kind of talked about transparency. It talked about accountability. And most importantly, it talked about empowerment being the new model around people, how they wanted to control their data. There's this one from Accenture in 2016. And what this really talks about, and again, I'm going to read this because it's pretty cool, how companies manage, secure, and share personal data is fast becoming the determining factor in profitable customer relationships. Those that get the trust equation right will be the ones best positioned to capture the most valuable customer data, as well as the digital's full business potential. So a really good piece of documentation, and clearly I'm looking at this for those of you who know a bit about our technology will see why I'm kind of talking about these things. Then we've got this chestnut, which came out in, well, actually this month, how companies are using personal data against people. A pretty scary title. It's a really hard read. There's not a single, other than that picture on the front, there's not a picture throughout the whole document. And for me, that's really tricky. Yeah, for me, this one is, I'd say, if organizations are saying they've got nothing to hide and nothing to fear, you kind of really need to read this report and just realize how far away from reality that assertion is. I say heavy reading, but definitely worth a read. And finally, the one reason why you have to be really nice to the GDPR geek, research and analysis to quantify the benefits arising from personal data rights under the GDPR. Well, someone really wrote that who knew how to do headlines. But what this looked at was the three of the data rights that come under GDPR: the access right, the right to access, the right to erasure, and the right to portability. And it highlights that consumers now value their new data rights almost as much as they value a brand's reputation and customer experience with the brand. Again, I find that really fascinating, because I guess where I'm coming at from is, really, do people today, other than, I'm assuming everyone in this room has heard of the GDPR. Okay. By the way, we went to an event last week. It was a GDPR event where someone in the audience stood up and says, "What does GDPR mean or stand for?" Which I thought was interesting, considering it was a GDPR event. So we're not sure if they knew what they turned up to. So do people understand their data rights? I think there's a lot of education going on at the moment out there. I thought I'd show this one because I know there are a number of charities. Whilst this is an old story, this only went out a couple of weeks ago, Selling Barbara. It, for me, kind of really opened my eyes just listening to it. Has anyone actually heard it? Go and download it, because when you start thinking about your supporters as a charity and you listen to Barbara, you kind of think, oh my word. Because Mark Roy, who's one of the guys who actually built his business on selling data to charities to contact them, is actually talking to her and says, well, of course, we refer to you as Dorothy Donor. And the voice, the kind of, she was so offended when they heard that. And for me, it kind of made me think we really need to be careful when we kind of like create these demographics and look at people. But this, as I say, this radio program went on and it talked about, sharing data, the rights, and how people didn't want, how she was saying, well, I'm happy to support a charity, but I don't want to sell my data. I know charities don't tend to do that now. But as I say, it really underpins kind of what GDPR is about. And for me, when we talk to our clients and say to them, when they're looking at their GDPR programs and their repermissioning strategies, and for me, the one thing I always just say to the client, does it feel right? Because I think if you approach it under that way, then you can't go far wrong. I'm not sure if many of you remember this, but back in 2014, a chap called Mr. Mansfield got a number of emails from John Lewis and decided that he hadn't consented to receiving those emails. They were unsolicited, and decided to kind of take John Lewis to court. He sued them, and John Lewis he won. John Lewis were instructed to pay damages to him. God knows what the legal fees were. And I do think, this is not a scare story, but this is going to happen. This is going to educate people around their data rights. And I think we're going to start to see headlines like this. It will probably be all unsolicited emails and SMS text messages, I'm sure, that we're going to be getting. Did you receive an email you weren't expecting? And there's going to have the no win, no fee. So there is going to be a concern. People are aware. And I do think this is just kind of going to move on and really kind of help to educate the market. For me, though, it's not all bad news. I think the people who get it right, and in terms of are really open and transparent around the data, how it's being used. And this is some research from Boston Consulting Group. They put the right to be forgotten button on a number of websites, so very transparent. They gave more control to individuals. And actually, those organizations generated 10 to 18% more data. So it's not all bad news. By having to be more open and by having to adopt this thing called the GDPR and really get behind the transparency, we should actually be able, as marketeers, to be able to generate more valuable data on the individuals, but fully transparent with them. Has anyone seen this video? I was in Old Street Tube Station only last month, and I saw this shop called the Data Dollar Store. And I was just fascinated by it, so I kept on Googling, and then I eventually came across this.
How can I help?
How much are those t-shirts?
Well, they're $2 data dollars.
$2
Yeah.
Okay.
We're not selling for money. We're selling for data.
What kind of data?
Photos, WhatsApp conversations.
Mine.
Yours.
How much do you want?
For Mark, I will take pictures from your phone, and we're going to display it on that screen for the next 2 days. For a t-shirt, I will take 5 WhatsApp conversations from your phone.
Of your choosing.
And for print, you'd have to offer me something. That's the deal.
I don't like that offer.
What I want to know is how much your data is worth to you. What would you give me for a print?
Loads of dollars.
Okay, pictures. A t-shirt with the pictures.
I'll go for the market.
Yeah, okay, I can do that.
Done. Deal.
Good. Deal?
Yeah, please.
Good.
I have 3 different currencies in my wallet. I would like to pay you with those. I don't want to pay you with my data.
Well, that doesn't work.
Why not?
If I stand here with your phone and look through all your messages, you feel it.
Yeah, so it's an invasion of privacy.
It does show that it makes you think though, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's true.
Can I open this?
I'd rather you didn't.
I think I'm going to walk out without it.
Well, that's fine.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you.
So I think that's a really good video to kind of help people understand that people really are starting to put a huge amount of value on, especially that chap who said, look, I'd much rather pay you money than my data to get the T-shirt. So kind of back to the GDPR, I know I kind of got to talk about it really. Everything we kind of set out to do within MyLife Digital was kind of underpinned by the GDPR. And for those of you who remember kind of Wolfie Smith from Citizen Smith, I know he really was a chancer, a dreamer, and probably an all-round bad guy, rogue, and probably not a great image to put in front of the GDPR, but I'm going for power to the people. And GDPR does focus on system rights, so the data subject. And I'm sure you're all aware of it. There are these key rights now, which is the right to be informed, so there's that kind of transparency bit again, the right of access, the right to rectification, the right to erasure, restrict processing, object, automated decision-making and profiling. But the one where I think there's kind of going to be massive disruption and kind of leads to the whole open data and the PSD2 is this right to data portability. And actually, out of all the conversations we have with clients, it's the one area that just people don't seem to be focused on at all. And again, I'm going to kind of read some words here because I just want to make sure I'm kind of reading you the right stuff because it's all technical and it comes out of the Working Party WP29, the Working Party group for data protection. And a data subject will have the right to receive the personal data concerning them, which they have provided to a controller in a structured, commonly used and machine-readable format, and have the right to transmit the data to another controller without hindrance from the controller to whom the data was provided. So a lot of people just assumed that that would be email, age, address, and that data. But actually, the Working Party considers it differently. And to give it its full value to the new right, provided by should also include the personal data that's observed from the activities of users, such as raw data processed by a smart meter or other types of connected objects, activity logs, history on websites or usage search activities, as well as transactions made under contract or consent, such as the titles of books purchased by an individual from an online bookstore, music streaming services. So data portability, to me, has an opportunity to massively disrupt the market. So it's not just banking. It could be loyalty programs where I might decide to go to British Airways and say, hey, I want all of my flight details because I want to transfer it to another airline so I can prove that I am a frequent flyer and then hopefully just pick up where I left off with BA with someone else. So there is potentially going to be a lot of kind of change on the horizon. I said right at the start of the presentation, so we set up MyLife Digital really to rebalance that control of personal data. And this is an image from our business plan. So this was about early 2015 when we were looking at doing our first round of funding. And I didn't have any of the articles, obviously, around it then because we didn't know about them, because that didn't really come out until April 2016. But we had the citizen sitting in the middle, and it said, kind of, what data are you collecting and holding about me? Let me see my data, let me control it, let me edit it. You can do this with my data, but not that, and you can share my data with them, but not with them. And then I guess GDPR text came out, and we started to read it and get to understand it, and we looked at the rights of the individuals, and we went, hang on, you know, right to access, right to rectification, and so on. We're thinking, hey, you know, we're onto something here. And I guess for us, it was great because the GDPR kind of underpins what we stand for and what we're about, and we actually do see the citizen as that data controller. So we kind of see it as a shared risk, because obviously the fines are fairly punitive under GDPR. And, you know, if the ICO does decide to really go out there and make an example of people, wouldn't it be better if you're kind of like sharing that accountability further down the data supply chain from where it's actually being generated? So the principles, if you like, behind us is, and this is where I kind of get into the GDPR discussion, so apologies, but Nick did tell me you guys might want to talk about it. But we use this 5W GDPR framework. So we go into all of our clients and we say, you know, the first thing you've got to do is do an audit, really, of all of the data that you hold across the organization, all the different data types. So what data's been collected, who's got access to that data, both internally and third parties and so on, where you collected that data, when you collected it, because you need time stamping, and then most importantly, you know, why did you collect the data? What was the purpose? Because going forwards, data minimalization is key under GDPR. You can't just capture a whole load of data, because one day you might want to use it. You have to be really transparent with it. Once you've understood the purpose, then you can look at one of these lawful reasons for why you are processing the data. And there's 6, and the one that we always end up talking about whenever we go to a charity event, is it consent or is it legitimate interests? My view is consent for processing, and I'm saying processing, not for communicating. Using consent as a basis for processing data is probably the last basis you want to be using, because it really is absolute. If someone withdraws their consent, you can no longer do it. So we are talking to a number of charities and other organizations, marketing, and the one that most of them are going down the route of for processing data, and I'm making a big point on the processing, is legitimate interests. In a lot of cases, an individual can object, but I'm going to come on to that in a second. But good lobbying by the Direct Marketing Association basically saw legitimate interest being allowed for direct marketing purposes. So you can process data, but you must never override the rights of the data subject, which means you have to carry out the balance test. And for me, put simply, there's a bit more kind of science behind it. You have to work out, you know, would that individual expect to hear from you? Would they expect you to be doing that with their data? So we're kind of getting into that area of kind of, would they expect to hear from you also? But if you're going down the legitimate interest route, you have to give them the right to object. And again, this is again about transparency and empowering and controlling the individual. So you can't just say, right, we're going to use legitimate interest. You do have to communicate with everybody your reason as to why you believe you have a legitimate interest, even for direct marketing purposes and the period of time. So again, a lot of our clients within the Wood for Trees part of the business have donor databases that might go back many years, and some of them might have not been active for a number of years. And do you actually have the right to continue to process that data going forward? So you have to build up your case, but you have to give them the right to object to that processing. So that's processing of the data, but obviously there's this other thing called Pecha, which is going to be replaced by the Electronic Privacy Regulation. They're saying at the same time as GDPR becomes enforceable, and that is you need consent if you're going to contact someone by email, by SMS, so you still need to record and capture the consent that you have. So I did read, and there's a lot of confusion out there, and there's another website out there called themselves GDPR Expert, and they said that you can use legitimate interest to email somebody. Okay, you can't. Right? If anyone tells you can, they're lying, and they really don't know what they're talking about. Okay, so you cannot do that for a marketing communication. Okay, you can for service messages and so on, but if you're looking at sending fundraising messages and so on, you can't do that. And we're saying kind of capture consent around phone, because obviously a lot of people are on TPS anyway, and if you have consent, you can then still call them. But we also think phone's going to come out, is going to be one of those restricted channels, and you're going to need consent for it. So the challenge is, obviously, across an organization, there's data being stored everywhere. It's in a CRM, it's in a service user database, it's in Excel spreadsheets, it's in the bottom drawer of filing cabinets, and then also data's being captured across many different areas. So you've got social, mobile, websites, you've got forms, stores, IoT devices. It's how do you control all of that? I mean, our clients kind of look at it, and there's that great image at the moment going around where someone's kind of like, cheeks are sucked in and they're going, oh my God, it's all going to end. But, it is complicated. And you do have a lot of these places. So shameless kind of promotion now, and I'm sorry guys, but this is kind of like how we approach it. And there are other systems out there. But we have this product called Concentric, and this is what it's all about from our point of view. This is how we're if you like, helping citizens gain better control of their data and working with organizations. If you remember, I said that rather than just the citizen using it, we're looking at empowering organizations to empower their customers and donors and supporters to control their data. So as you can see here on the right-hand side, you've got kind of websites where we've got widgets where you can capture the data from, and you can control the consent statement that's going out to each of those areas and devices, and you know which purpose the data's being collected for. You've got integration into a CRM system, but it could be across multiple systems. So we've got in this middle bit here, the ID validation. So where an individual might be the same person across multiple systems, they would have a single ID within our platform. There's a consent receipt, full audit trail, and so on, and then there's the organization portal I'm going to show in a minute. But for us, kind of where I get really excited and where the disruption is going to come from, and we've built the platform to encourage kind of disruptive technologies, if you like, to come and play with our API and kind of make sure that they're embedding privacy by design and GDPR by design straight into their new applications. And that is in our Engage environment. That's the developer API, so they can come in and they can build their workflows. The Strongbox is where it's a citizen can store their data, and it's also where data can be made portable and be transferred from provider to provider. Now again, if you recall what I was saying earlier, our view is that the more control and access and transparency you give to an individual around their data, the more the trust they're going to place in you and the more they're likely to give up. So I don't see this as a bad thing. I think this is a good thing to give them that access. Jackie from Dogs Trust will recognize this, but it's not the Dogs Trust view. And this is a call center view of the data. And where we're different from a number of organizations out there is we do place a lot of emphasis on the legal or the lawful justification of processing data. So as you can see here on the left-hand side, rewards, grocery, clothing, those are the who's, the different departments or the different organizations that have access to this data. Then I have my data types, the address, the email, and so on. And then I actually have, for account administration, I have a contract in place so I can process your data, I can use it for these purposes. But for communications, I'm using a legitimate interest, and it's all made clear and it's transparent to the individual. This is, say, the call center, so they can be capturing the data, they can be a shopping basket of consents, dare I say it, can I believe I said that. And then also you can capture multiple consents from a single click at the top across multiple purposes. And then the other big thing is consent in some places will expire over a certain period, so you need to be aware of what consents are likely to need renewing or reconsenting. And then finally, if you remember that email piece around, don't get fined and be able to have an audit trail over the consent they gave you to receive that email, this is going to be absolutely critical under GDPR. You need to have that audit trail. And what we have here is a full history of when consent was granted, what privacy policy was in place. You can see, they can eyeball the permission statement that was seen at the point it was captured, and so on. So we never set out, if I'm honest, to build human interfaces into our API. We wanted organizations to basically come and design and do great things on top and use it. So this is our view as to how it can be controlled. And this is the most important thing from our point of view, is actually giving the system control. So what you just saw was the organization, how they're controlling consent when they're on the phone to somebody. This is actually putting it into the hands of the individual. Again, it's just our view on it. You can design it any which way you want, but as you can see here, they can say you can use my email address, my telephone number, you can see the purposes. You can see address can be amended, so you have the right to rectification and amendment of data. I can see my history, and I can even kick off that dreaded thing, right to be forgotten. But we do know, as say, put it there, you're engendering trust. So I'm not going to cover this because I'm probably running over. But for us, this is about putting the system in control. It's about doing what's right by the individual. We see a lot of clients kind of going, oh my God, GDPR, it's a nightmare. I don't know how we're going to cope. And yeah, there is going to be a big investment, both in time, a massive investment in time, but also investment in technology to help manage it. But I really do believe that those companies that kind of look at putting the citizen first, rather than viewing it from a compliance challenge and doing the right thing, will actually find it a much easier approach. And by doing that, I really do hope that, you guys will benefit from it. So, thank you.